Trapped between two meetings.
Because that never happens to me, right? Like I never multi-booked.
As in, cool that you not cool that it went down.
Hello, everybody. So I am presenting about my trip to BSides Canberra. I've got a lot to get through, so I'll try and go as fast as I can. But this was the biggest community-based hacking conference in Australia, and super cheap as well, at only $50, when RoxCon in Melbourne, which I went to earlier, is $500. I reckon this one was better anyway. So yeah, one room, 1,800 hackers. So it's the majority of, I would say, the Australian community. So it was lucky from a community health point of view that all of the planes made it intact. So, yeah, 2 days of conference, 2 tracks of presentations, and there were like the whole time hardware hacking workshops, lockpicking, capture the flag, which is like there's all these hacking challenges, and when you get into a particular system, there's like a string in there that you can paste into the scoring system and you get points, and like so scoreboard and winners and stuff. Incident response challenge, and my friend won that. I was originally not going to go because I've been to 2 interstate conferences recently already, and it's a bit expensive. But I took one look at the talks list and was like, oh, gotta go. So I'm going to be doing a summary of a few talks, my favorite ones. This one was my top favorite. Contactless access control with electromagnetic interference guns. So there's this touch to exit button on the wall next to a door, and it's not a real button. It's like uses the same technology as your touchscreen on your phone, capacitive stuff. So it detects the presence of your finger and opens the door. But it turns out that they are susceptible to electromagnetic interference for the frequency range that your finger outputs. And so here it's like a car starter system being run at the frequency of finger, but it's and in fact when he, like this is a frame of a video. When he was recording this video, he couldn't actually hit stop on his phone because it was like affecting his phone and making it think the screen was like doing stuff. They had a look in this electromagnetic testing lab to see how it all worked, and then built this coil that fires the frequency at the thing, and like it works from that distance away. And then they turned it into a handheld gun. Oh, but this is magic door opener. Do not assemble. So this is it. This is one of their apartments. There's this button in the door from like a balcony or something. But yeah, through. So this is to open the door from the other side, where you don't actually have access to the button because obviously you just press the button. But yeah, so they could shoot this through the door, and then light goes green and the door opens. So using drone batteries with this thing, they had a range of about 1 meter, and so they want it to work from further away, so they need more power, and this formula means that they need a lot of power. So what they had been doing was emulating the finger, which completes the capacitor or something, but instead they want to try and manipulate the capacitor plate directly, and so they build this, a metal cooking tray attached to the end of a stick. So the tray emits the signal, and they pump 400 volts into it. So there was a lot.
Nobody calls 400 volts.
I'm just looking at the damn plate. Someone walking up the door.
So there are a lot of there were a lot of blown up components in the development of this because they soldered stuff on the wrong way around, and yeah. But with this thing, it worked from like 3 meters away. So he was standing all the way back at the stairs on the edge of the stage and activating the button that's attached to that box there. But an alternative of that button is this you might see a mechanical metal bar across some doors that like push to retract a latch, used in like emergency exits, that kind of thing. But it's used frequently. Well, this one is a capacitive version of that. It's like touchscreen on the whole thing. But it's used frequently in data centers, and it's even worse than the button because it's attached right on the door, so there's a shorter distance than having to get to the wall beside the door. So like you wouldn't need you wouldn't even need a gun as big as the first iteration to get through this. So don't use capacitive door buttons. Terrible.
Why are they using them?
Yeah, there's
Because they're cheap.
Because you could use a stick. Surely it's more expensive than a mechanical. Yeah.
No, but like, surely you want a mechanical one for if all electricity fails in something. Surely you want a mechanical one.
What's that?
Okay, yeah, I don't know.
No.
It depends, right? If there's anywhere where you're deploying things like Halo, you have to have a certain level of mechanical.
Yeah, that's what
necessity. But once you're out of that, then you still have things like man traps and stuff that would run off that and just.
So next presentation is about de-obfuscating obfuscated Ruby.
Where does one apply obfuscated Ruby?
Sorry?
Where does one apply obfuscated Ruby?
Well, there are commercial obfuscation products for Ruby, but this presentation demonstrates how they are completely useless. Yeah, so there's terminology there, but this guy seems to have something against Ruby. Always calls it Ruby, and he has a CVE, which is a something vulnerability. Well, like it's an identifier for a vulnerability that you've like disclosed. But he has a CVE for a skateboard. So basically, the problem and why you use obfuscation is that you want to run your code that you've written on a box inside another company, because like they would have access to your code effectively, but you don't want them to be able to just take it and do whatever. So yeah, you want to use obfuscation, but obfuscating bytecode isn't even new. But with Ruby, dynamic dispatch means that you can't mangle the class or method name. So there's not really a lot that you can do. And the lack of a JIT means that you can't do much to method bodies. So Ruby, the interpreter converts it to YARV bytecode, but you can read and understand that. And because Ruby uses a dynamic virtual machine, you can trivially insert instrumentation, like binding.pry, or call the C function rbf_eval. And given Ruby's open source, you can put your own debug interfaces into it and easily backport Ruby code to a previous version if you need to use some particular tools that are version specific. So with this code, you can hook straight into the VM right after deobfuscation happens to output the bytecode. What these obfuscation programs tend to do is it is Ruby, like they give you a chunk of like encrypted Ruby, just an encrypted string, but they use like they pass that to a deobfuscate method and then evaluate on that. And this will hook in straight after that's happened and print out the YARV, but it's still bytecode. But anyway, one obfuscator was just using ROP13, which 26 characters in English language. It just rotated by 13 of them. So I'd even included comments, which was helpful. Here is some YAV. There is he made use of someone's previous research project to turns YAV back into source code, so he didn't have to write that himself. But it was from 2010, and the VM's gained a whole bunch more instructions since, so he had to update it a bunch. But inside like Ruby's YAV executor, there are joke instructions. So there's this one called bitblip that actually returns that string, but you can't actually call it, so it's a bit weird. And there's this one too, the answer 42. So he implemented them in his decompiler. Why not? So the Ruby's mostly in English, but help messages inside YAV have, like the source code, have a lot more detail in Japanese. So you can see that like the description of this method, expand array to num objects, in Japanese, where like each of those characters is a word. It's not quite equivalent to that English description, but he was able to check his work by decompiling and then recompiling to see if the output was the same. But so he updated the YAV to Ruby thing called reversal for Ruby 193. And so, yeah, his project's called Unruh, and it basically gives you the source. And his one's better than reversal because it actually hooks into the behavior and not just the bytecode. So it's a lot more versatile than reversal is, and in fact he can't even work out how he would defeat Unruh. And so reversal, it just takes the whole program, turns it back into source. But with Ruby, there's not everything is defined initially. Like as it evaluates, classes are added and that kind of thing. And if you just got everything at the start, then you'd miss out on some other stuff that's defined later on. So there are two different ways to define a class. Class name blah block, but the other being class.new, which is what's shown here, the YAV code for that. Funny note is that if you included reversal, the library from user space, it would try to decompile itself. But with Unruh, a bonus is that it unfurls metaprogramming, so things like Sinatra's get method, DSLs like that, turn into what that actually is doing. But it's a nightmare inside Rails because of the crazy amount of things like that are happening in there. So to get any sensible output, and to avoid decompiling all the dependencies, you can either re-implement Rails without any method bodies, or you could so Unruh it hooks into the at exit, so that's when it actually dumps the code, so that everything has been defined. So you can either implement Rails with blank method bodies, or you can use this to stub everything automatically, unless you decompile file by file. And with these kinds of commercial products, they tend to phone home to let the manufacturer know it's just been used or whatever. But you know, given he was using like pirated versions of these things, he didn't really want to do that. So I tried to use an unroutable VM. It's like, you know, not networked, but it was a pain to work with when he needed to get a dependency or something. I had to enable that, and then like, you know, oh no, did the thing actually call back in the meantime? So instead, he had disabled all Ruby's sockets inside Ruby. Comes with a Rails shim, so you can decompile that without much effort. But yeah, you can check it out. And there's environment variables to configure what goes on. The ISEC one does full instructions, and you can't actually remember what the YOLO one does. Yeah, it works with Ruby 2.1. Yeah. No obvious way to defeat it. Basically, yeah, like there's cat and mouse games to make Unruh not work, but like various things you could do to prevent it, but then they're easily worked around. So it's, yeah, Ruby is just really bad for giving your program to someone. And probably the only solution is to put it inside a virtual machine, he was saying. I didn't quite understand that. But so Node.js, he was saying, might actually be a good idea because of its JIT, meaning you can actually obfuscate, like mangle things up way more. And yeah, there's no obvious way to defeat this attack. And it means you can use AFL, which is like this fuzzing thing. Fuzzing is basically generating and supplying random input to a program to see if you can get it to crash. Because a crash means there's a bug, and a bug often leads to a vulnerability that you can then exploit. And so using this, he ported AFL to Ruby, and so you can test the internals of a program that you've de-obfuscated. So one note is that if the program defines classes, because it hooks into the exit when it's actually going to output the source code, if the program defines classes, then does something with them, then defines more classes, if it crashes before it defines the rest of them, Unruh won't actually see them. So there's something to keep in mind. Yeah. This presentation was about defusing World War II bombs, and started with guns, but I missed that bit. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos for this one because he moved super quickly. But the average life expectancy of a diffuser was 10 weeks, and they promoted them to officer, even though they would not actually, live long enough to utilize that that office. So it started off with a mechanical clockwork fuse, which is like, the thing counts down and then the bomb goes off. But you can hack this by putting a magnetic collar around the bomb that locks the components in place so the clock can't actually move, or inject it with liquid plastic. But they found a way around that. I didn't write that down, but the counter for that was to use thermite to get through the case of the bomb, and then this bomb has the explosive is amatol, which is explosive but also flammable, but not it won't explode if you light it on fire. So you can light it on fire, and then it just gets rid of all the amatol, and then there's only a grenade equivalent bit in the middle. You just get rid of that. Yeah.
Kind of like, when you first attach that much to the bomb, it's
the whole way.
Let's see what that does then. Yeah.
10 weeks starts to make sense.
With the amatol ones, one of the other things you could do was instead of fire, you could use water, where you just blast water into it, and it comes this sludge that you just scoop out. But the counter to that was water detection electronics that trigger the fuse. Next up, naval mines. So these ones that had magnetic fuses to detonate when a ship goes by. You could counter that with, so the same methods as before, but the counter hack was that typically you want to get in, to defuse it, you want to get into it and then have a look around inside to see how it works, but they put in a photoelectric sensor, so it detonates when you shine a light into it to see how it works.
So is this stuff that was done in World War II?
Yeah.
And so this was how they would diffuse them, but then the countermeasures that they would do to diffusing. Right.
So a way to get around that was that you could freeze it so the battery becomes inert, so it can't trigger. You use liquid oxygen to do that, so you pour it on for 5 minutes or something like that.
Did you drill a hole in it first, did they say? You just pour liquid oxygen outside of the thing?
Well, I think it's just on the outside.
And you've got to get it out of the water to do that, right?
Yeah.
On the boat that might be out of milk.
That's a good point. Yeah. So a counter to that was a counter hack was lower temperature batteries, so the freezing didn't work. But then they had the idea of towing behind a boat or a plane electromagnetic emitters that pretended to be a ship, and so it'd go around, but then the bomb would think there's a boat nearby and blow up, but didn't actually damage anything.
Can't you just shoot at the bomb and the bomb would
Well, you don't know where it is exactly. It's underwater. So the way they got around that was the bomb needed more, a longer period of detection, or multiple detections effectively. But then they just used multiple passes, so the plane just flew over the same section multiple times. So there's also acoustic mines that detect the sound of ships' engines, and they hacked that with a depth charge, although wide spectrum noisemaker that incorporated the frequency of what a ship's engines would be. But then they made the bombs require a slowly increasing noise. Yeah. They discovered a German military manual at one point with incredible and precise detail on how all of the bombs worked, and all of the bombs had codes printed on the outside. There was a consistent numbering suffix. 0 was anti-disturbance, 5 was impact, something else was timer bomb. And in this manual, it was specifying that if there were any damages to the paint or there was rust or anything, that you couldn't use the bomb, had to send it back for repair. And he couldn't think of any good reason why that would be the case, other than there being German. So towards the end, they started to use portable X-ray machines to examine the bombs to see what the mechanism was inside them to be able to defuse it. And these things were not easy to do, so it kind of demonstrated just how hard they were working to get rid of these things. But the decision by Germans to use electronic fuses was extremely good because they were very hard to defuse. And the Allies had chemical fuses like acids eating into something, but they were very unreliable. Next up, APTs, which is an advanced persistent threat. So the A stands for advanced. If they're after you, they will invest in you. These are basically super advanced something inside your company, like they've got their virus in here. It's like handcrafted to target your company specifically. So yeah, it's personally targeted, which means that they've put heaps of effort into targeting you specifically, and so like you're not going to fare well.
Great summary.
Yeah, security is like this whole thing of cost benefit of like when people are attacking you. So you just have to raise the bar high. Like you can never be 100% secure. You just have to raise the bar high enough that there become other more attractive, like lower hanging fruit than you. So with an intrusion, the average time to detection is 22 days, which is a long time. So do you keep your logs for long enough to be able to detect that? I suggest using honeypots, which is a like deliberately vulnerable thing inside your network that looks attractive because it's like super weak, but it's actually useless. So it's like it's wasting their time. One strategy the offensive use is targeted advertising used to bring your employees to a website for profiling them, so they can see what you're running, and then use that to mount some attacks later on. But do what you can to prevent lateral movement, so like pivoting between your architecture, like isolate the stuff. And if a technique works, no matter how lame, they will use it, like phishing or default credentials. The reason an APT is on your network is most of the time for information theft. So they'll need to exfiltrate that information. It is stealing, but with copying it's hard to notice given the original's still there. And this exfiltration is likely to be careful, consistent, and staged because they've put so much effort into attacking you that they don't want to be detected. So they'll blend into normal network usage. So you want to, you want to look for what it would look like if access was denied or permitted. And the parting quote was, "Once you go black hat, you never want to go back." Defending is a lot harder than attacking. Attacking is more fun. So this presentation was about defeating the Lockwood V7 lock, which is very good lock, but not perfect. So with lock price, there's more and more expensive locks that are more advanced, but with the price, you give diminishing returns. So this one's supposed to be pick and copy, like copying the key, resistant. It's got 7 pins in a V shape. So from this one, half of them are that way. Like they alternate.
What do we look at on the right?
So the right, that's the barrel from the middle of the lock.
So what does the key look like? It doesn't look like a normal key then? It looks more like
there's a picture down there. It's mostly a normal key, but Fanta. Yeah. And it's got an anti-drill ball bearing, so you can't just drill it out. So you can actually just pick it like a normal lock. You don't need to overthink it. And in fact, you can shim the lock, like it's cheating, but you can put a thin piece of metal between the barrel and the housing, so they left a little bit of space. So yeah, you don't even need to pick it properly. You just like put in a piece of metal and then like lift up the pins until the metal is like you can shove it in between. And just keep doing that. And so here's the key, but whilst from the side it looks like it might be a bit fancy, from this side it looks like a normal key. and still got 7 symmetric cuts in it, but you can't buy a blank for it to be able to like cut the key yourself or someone else doing it. But so here are like a bunch of different openings of Lockwood keys, different key styles overlaid on the left here, and it turns out that this one, the most common Lockwood key, is pretty much an excellent fit, and so you can base it on that. So here's that key. Like it sticks out the bottom a little bit, but you can just sand down the bottom until it fits. And yeah, here he's like filed a bit of the key off to do his own cutting, and it's not quite perfect though because yeah, the red one is sticking out too much and the green one is depressed too much. But like it's pretty close with just one attempt there. But the top of the blank key doesn't go high enough, but you can just put some solder on top of it and then file it off. Or, because solder's not terribly rigid, you can use the barrel to cut the solder. Just shove the key in really hard. Yeah, so high security locks are better, but they're not unbeatable. And the B7, yeah, it's good. It's a good introduction to it. You can't 3D print with plastic a copy of the key because it'll kind of snap too easily. But you could use that to create a wax cast and then make a stronger copy. Yeah. So this presentation, just because it works doesn't mean it's not broken. Why are all my things owned? They're terrible, you might think. Because the more you look, the more you find stuff that is unpatchable for business reasons. And there are too many new developer tools too fast. So Beyond Corp is a method of doing zero trust networks, which is like this super advanced way of arranging your network where no node on the network has like any trust of anything else. It's like you've got a firewall around everything. Google are doing this and apparently sounds awesome, but you need complete buy-in from the top management because it took Google years to implement, and it's being it took them being completely owned to be to have the motivation to actually go for it. So if you know what an attacker might be doing, could you tell if they were doing it? It's probably pretty important to think about. You want to harden your targets and look for evidence that something's been done. Tighten your security groups, and there's this thing called the Verizon TBI database of incident response, I think, which has got some cool information about the public businesses getting owned and stuff. So you should have a logging platform, and you want to have 24/7 graphs of the logs. You want to visualize your logs because you don't want to just rely on someone to read them. They're not going to do that. Or if you do have someone who's reading them all day, apparently they should be given a promotion or something. I have dedicated screens for this thing, and like, yeah, you want to be able to see when something's happening. So here, maybe you wouldn't know if you're getting denial serviced, but this chart you can like obviously see the traffic has just gone crazy. I have run out of time some time ago. When stuff happens, log it. Like when someone logs into something secure or that's critical, maybe send them a private message to check if it was actually them. And don't rely on Slack too much. Yeah, log lots of stuff. Most of the weird things that happen on your network or environment will be developers, but you can treat it like a real threat for practice. Use yourself as a test case and use offensive tools against the offenders. I'll whip through this one. So this is about getting raising your privileges on Windows. So once you're on a box, but you don't have administration privileges. So apparently McAfee antivirus is always a good target because it introduces like tons of vulnerabilities, which is pretty ironic for an antivirus. So check out any application installs outside the default location, because you know that if they're set up to run as an admin, but don't actually have admin protection against replacing that program as executable, then you can do that. You can put something in the all users startup folder and then request remote access from an admin, so that when they log in, that program is executed under their credentials. Check for any system images lying around. Look in log files for session tokens, but there's not much you can do with just read access on a Windows server. You can upload a remote shell, put stuff in for Apache local file includes. There might be credit card data logged. Custom applications are often broken, like logging credentials. With memory access, you can use this tool called Inception to get heaps of details about what's going on. And hands up if you know about direct memory access from Thunderbolt or Firewire. So with those ports, when you plug something in to your computer, make sure that you trust what it actually is, because the way that those operate so fast is because they give direct memory access to the RAM in your computer. So like they can dump the whole memory of your computer, and like there's Thunderbolt over USB-C now, so like basically just don't plug anything into your computer unless you trust it.
They added security to it in the most recent one, where it's supposed to, like the OS level thing, will prompt you.
It's supposed
do you
to.
trust this device, and then it gets access, instead of previously where just plugged in. It's like, yeah, I have access to my memory.
There's an Ubuntu thing though, where even at the lock screen, it can dump the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, desktop Linux, that's a pinnacle security. As a user.
Well, Windows didn't include drivers for Thunderbolt over USB.
What about PXE? Because I don't know a little bit of PXE back in the day.
I'll get to it. So with network shares, you can look for images and backups on there, scripts that are automatically called locally but referenced on the network. Decrypt the passwords in the sysvol. Install everything you can, maybe with MSIs, for example, McAfee. Like if they don't have McAfee, you can put it on there and get yourself access to a vulnerability. You can have a look at other users. So there's like Citrix, or Microsoft and VMware have similar offerings where they use the temp directory as a home drive. You can just put something in there. Bad passwords and defaults for new employees. And PXE boot, which is a pre-boot execution environment loaded from the network. And if you get access to a computer in F12 at boot, you can select from the available servers and like check out what the images are there and see what you can gather from the vulnerabilities that are on that. QR codes if there are any around there, so they can store lots of data, like your flight boarding pass. Just manipulate that. The registry has a bunch of keys that are interesting to look at. You can see what is configured to do run as, run once, rename and reboot, always install or SRP policy. Services, what's set up to auto run. Check what user they're running as, what permissions. If you can't access the details of a process, it's running as a higher user than you, so it might be a good target. SAP starts with higher privileges, which is, yeah.
You know how much SAP costs? Of course it does.
Can have everything at once.
500 million in our wasn't
You can use Task Manager to just check out what's running, and like sometimes command line arguments can reveal passwords. Something amazing that I hadn't heard of before is that unquoted service paths, you can exploit spaces in that, because Windows first looks for the path split up in individual parts, but then it falls back to trying the whole thing as if it were a quoted string. So if you have C:/program space files / whatever, it'll first check if a thing exists called program.exe in the C drive. Yeah. You can look in the volume shadow copy for deleted stuff, Windows LAN passwords, and Word documents on the network. So like template files. So if your Word documents reference that template file, you can insert a macro like into the template file, and then everyone's got it. Everyone gets it. So there were some other talks that were too complex to cover here, but there was a Spectre and Meltdown overview by, well, not overview, like details, by one of the guys who actually wrote up the initial disclosure report. That was super in depth and like amazing. There was secure coding with Rust, that it's like secure by design, and it shares memory by communicating rather than communicating by sharing memory. And the ownership model, and they detailed how you can use all that, and that if you need to, you can still do unsafe operations on raw memory. You can isolate that to just the little piece that you need to do. And there was Adrian Justice, who so I used to run the Swinburne Cybersecurity Club, and he was the president of that before me. I haven't seen him or really spoken to him in years, because he's been shipped off to Canberra working for the government on the incident response team for like Australia. And he presented on iOS analysis, that is Cisco IOS, not Apple. And so, yeah, like routers and switches and stuff. There is this thing called a smart install on these switches that lets you set it up easily. It's a feature, but it's got so many critical vulnerabilities that basically just disable it. And it's super easy to exploit, and in fact was responsible for recently Iran being knocked off the internet. And these script kiddies got in there and replaced the configuration file with an ASCII art American flag, which the router then tried to execute line by line. He ended with, "Please don't target Australian routers because I don't want to have to clean it up." And I'll leave you with this series of SIM cards. emulating like a whole bunch of users. You can send like fraudulent SMS and use it for like making accounts on things, because various SMS APIs, like Twilio, have an API you can query to check if a number is like from them. So if you want to sign up to a service and you want to protect your identity, you can use because Australian SIM cards require identity verification to like get a SIM card. You can get one from New Zealand because they don't need that, and then you can make one of these. Have all the identities. Yeah, thank you.